Am I doing the ministries I should be doing? Am I living in the right place I should be living in? Am I have the right job I should be having? Am I living in the right home? I mean, all these things, they come down to, okay, God has created you for a pattern of good works, and it's not just like your neighbor, your non-Christian is just living to get by or have a good time. No, I'm a Christian. I'm an ambassador of Christ. I'm supposed to represent him and live for him in a way that makes an impact on my world, on my generation, and my sphere of influence. And it's a very specific set of good works. I want to make sure I'm on that. And so I challenge you as we study, believe it or not, for 12 lessons. We're going to go through this first missionary journey of the Apostle Paul in 12 parts. And we're going to start with God calling Paul into this work. And I want to keep an eye for the next 12 weeks on what God's preordained path of good works is for you. And while we're looking at a career missionary here and following his adventures, if you will, I want to make sure that we're paralleling the application of this to where God has called you to be a missionary. Maybe it's in your office complex. Maybe it's in your neighborhood. And maybe you're not going to move or learn a new language or get on a plane and fly away. But are we sure that you're being the kind of person that God asks you to be in terms of your purposed intention, that you're his workmanship for these good works? And I want to rethink all that. And I want to start by looking at where Paul is when God calls him to this work, sitting in the church, leading in the church, ministering in the church of Antioch in Syria. So grab your Bibles if you haven't already, and I want to look at the first 5 verses of Acts chapter 13 to get the beginning of this launch of the Apostle Paul into ministry. He's still known as Saul in this text, and God's going to call him out, and I want to look at the context of it to see if we can't put a few foundational things in place in our lives to make sure we're not missing the preordained path of good works that God has called for us and ordained for us because we're not in the place or doing the things that the Apostle Paul was here. There's plenty of points of application I don't want to miss in this text. Let's start in verse number 1, Acts chapter 13. I'm going to read verses 1 through 5 with a little commentary because I can't help myself. And I'm going to read it from the English Standard Version. Verse 1, now there were in the church at Antioch prophets and teachers. We got teachers in our church. We got pastors in our church. We don't have apostles and we don't have prophets. Ephesians 2:20 says those are foundational offices of the church. The reason you need prophets in the church at Antioch in Syria in the first century here, in the 60s, is because you don't have a New Testament, and this church desperately needs New Testament teaching. We need to know about justification by faith, and I can't turn to Romans chapter 4. I need to know about issues of Old Testament ceremonial law, and I can't turn to Galatians chapter 3. I need to understand things about church function, and I don't have 1 Timothy or Titus. I mean, there's all kinds of issues. What do I do with the Old Testament ceremonial law? I don't have the book of Hebrews. We have none of this recorded, and so we need God giving new revelatory information about New Testament function and New Testament doctrine without a written New Testament. So we need the function of prophets. And the miraculous foundation of the church, the apostles and prophets, and they validated and put the imprimatur of God on their ministries by these miraculous things, like the predictive prophecies of the prophets, though primarily their goal was to inform, not to foretell something that was happening, and the miraculous ability of the apostles to found the church of God with the authority of Christ. These things certainly bore a miraculous edge to it because God was trying to make it clear. Anyone could stand up and say, this is what New Testament truth ought to be, but I need someone to stand above the rest in the way that God allowed those apostles and prophets to break natural law by knowing things they shouldn't know and be able to do things they shouldn't be able to do was a way in which God established for us what we need, which is the lamp to our feet, the light to our path, New Testament revelation. We need a library of 27 books to guide the church for the next 2,000 years, and so we have it. But right now, we need prophets in the church, and so we have prophets and teachers, though they're not delineated in this list. We have 5 here that were on staff, it seems, the leaders of the church of Antioch in Syria, and they're listed. Barnabas, we know, and he's listed first, and he's always listed first at this point when we see him in combination with others because he's a key leader. He's become a key leader in so many ways.